Amy is in a good place right now. She has heightened appearances, she's become a staple member of the core cast, and her character appears to be generally well liked. Just this year, we're going to be able to play as her in Sonic Frontiers, as well as Sonic Superstars, and thanks to Origins Plus, you can already play as Amy through the classic games. However, this heightened focus on Amy and her greater presence in the franchise as a whole has also with it brought numerous different types of discourse, some of which focusing on her characterization, on how it's changed, why it's changed, and if the change is necessarily all good. Now, change is a natural process that's always going to take place, especially if you've got a franchise like Sonic that's been going on for over 30 years. It would be very strange for everything to remain exactly the same. And I've already gone over some of these changes back in a previous video of mine focused specifically on Amy, so take a look at that if you're interested in some of the earlier changes. But for this video today, all we're going to be focusing on is a more recent development with Amy's character and more relevant to current day conversation, which is Amy Rose being presented as a very strong, very quick, very capable character, and how that can contrast with some of her, if not most of her prior appearances, and we're going to talk about whether it's a good or a bad thing, why these things may be happening, and all that sort of thing. I've observed other people have conversations in the community, but unfortunately, internet being the internet, a lot of the time it just devolves into two sides throwing very weak insults at one another and not actually getting on with the discussion. So we're trying to sift through all of the strange online politics and just look at it honestly about Amy, her character, and why these things have changed. I think the primary place to begin with is her general escalation in character. Before, Amy was a rather mundane individual. A lot of people may refer to her as a normal girl, and this agitates other people, but it's easy to see why. Because despite Amy's mundane status in a meta point of view, obviously we saw Amy joining in on adventures, defeating robots, and doing all sorts of crazy things just like everybody else. But if you look in universe, Amy, at least early to mid-line Sonic, was really just living a normal life outside of being wrapped up in Sonic's adventures on occasion. She had a home, at least in two different occasions with Sonic Battle and Sonic Adventure. She was just doing shopping and going out on parties, and then yes, chasing after Sonic, but it was a rather normal lifestyle. That doesn't mean that she was also not a capable adventurer or friend or fighter, because in both those examples she was able to keep up with everybody else. But I think there's a misconception if someone hears someone refer to Amy as a normal girl, is that it means she's pathetic or a waste of time, which no, that doesn't mean that necessarily. It's just a factor of life. For example, you could say that Knuckles is a guardian of the Master Emerald because he just sits there and guards it, and most of the time that's what happens, but of course that would be a rather boring game, wouldn't it? So despite that being what he does and who he is, we still get to see other sides of Knuckles all the time, and it doesn't make him any less of a character. And yet, it would be disingenuous to ignore one element of Amy's character that's always been there since the beginning, which is usually what I see when people defend against the claim that Amy was a normal girl, as it were, which is that Amy has a connection to magic. And yes, it has always been there. Her very introduction to the series in CD kind of relied on this element of her character. But the key thing about Amy's magical abilities is that they were usually understated, ever present, but understated. They never crucially impacted any event in the story or the games. There was never a key decision that required Amy to use a strong, clear magical ability to solve that ever came up. I wouldn't call them inconsequential, but they were used more as flavour, weaved in between to add a little bit more depth to Amy's character, but they didn't crucially affect anything. But they are always there, and it's come up time and time again throughout. But if you're not paying attention, it's very easy to just miss all of the indications of Amy's supernatural abilities, or to just chalk it up to, oh, this is a gameplay element and nothing more. Things like Amy turning invisible in Sonic 06, for example. Why on earth can she do that? It seems really random, and it is really random, but it's because she has strange magic abilities that they gave it to her in the first place. Now, was it a cop-out ability? Probably, but if it wasn't for Amy's history of magic, they likely would have picked something else in that instance. So as you can see, there's reasons both to agree and disagree with the claim that Amy was a normal individual before recently. But I think this ties into another important thing to look at, which is how Amy's presented by the game and story to be believable to us, because we went from Amy in Generations being treated as a thing Sonic would push away with his hand out of mild agitation, to her being this core, crucial, well-respected member. And that's not to say Amy wasn't respected before, but alongside this change came an increased capacity for Amy to contribute. I would define this with a couple core categories, being speed, physical strength, and leadership ability. As far as speed is concerned, this is the idea that Amy, over the course of chasing after Sonic, has increased in speed to keep up with him, and therefore is now far faster than when we originally met Amy's character. And this is something that's been around for a while. I've covered it before in that previous video I mentioned, but I'll elaborate a little bit more here. So, ever since Sonic Heroes is probably the earliest point you can point towards this, since she occupied the speed role, but I wouldn't say that that's where the narrative began. Certainly I never heard any Sega official interview or even popular fan theory about that around the time. SBO the Chameleon was a speed character in Sonic Heroes, but you don't see anyone trying to say he's as fast as Sonic the Hedgehog, so it really was just a matter of Sonic Heroes had 3 slots, Amy fit into the speed slot. Not to say that she was slow, but yeah, doesn't mean Sonic speed. But moving past that game, gradually you would see Amy be referenced as being quicker. She would fill the speed role in all sorts of games, like the Sonic Riders series for example, or mobile spin-off games. And then you get to today where it's considered that she is a fast character. But back before the 2010s, where her character was really getting revised, she wasn't. Look at Sonic 06, for example. She was not quick at all. In fact, I think she was the slowest character in the game, so that's quite the opposite. But then again, 06 was 06. If you look at Shadow the Hedgehog, she seems to be just the general level most of the Sonic cast was when it comes to speed. And other games like Advance treated her the same as Knuckles or Tails when it came to speed. And there hasn't actually been an official stance on where Amy's speed lies in the current iteration of Sonic. A fan community idea is that she's sped up over the years, and it's clear that she's presented as faster than she used to be as well, but that could still just be the equivalent of being that general fast speed most characters occupy. It doesn't necessarily correlate to her being at Sonic's level, or even above Knuckles or Tails, for instance. So I think some people let that fan idea go further than it actually is, but it doesn't mean that there isn't some truth to it. It's just been very undefined. Her physical strength is another thing that's been really undefined, and that's going to be a common issue when it comes to figuring out what's changed and why with Amy. Before, once she had her hammer, she was good at swinging it and she would hurt things that got hit by it. That was very obvious, no argument there. But that's not the same thing as having supernatural strength. Characters like Knuckles is what we look to for that. Boulder smashing, lifting giant things, defeating opponents with less hits than it takes other characters to do, that sort of thing. That is the super strength, and Knuckles has always occupied that role. But lately, Amy now seems to be equated to super strength. We hear that in the new Superstars game, Origins Plus, and the classic styled comics, that classic Amy, who has been retroactively added into more adventures than she used to be, is coming into her strength and finding out she's stronger than she thought she was. In the comics, we see her pick up a giant hammer made of pure metal and swing it down with the assistance of Silver, but Silver states that he barely had to do anything. So Amy is able to mostly lift and swing that on her own, and that is a huge escalation in power. There hasn't really ever been anything indicating that before, And it's not the only thing. We see her breaking down rocks in Sonic Superstars. Now the question is, can every character do that? And if not, can Knuckles at least do that? If only Amy can do that, then that further encroaches onto Knuckles' space as the strongman, and Knuckles is actually at risk of losing one of his key elements as a member of Sonic Team, which was his strength. Amy, being really strong, kind of diminishes his influence. But this is another thing that's never actually been stated. It's very ill-defined and we'll just have to wait to see more. But it is definitely something that has been on the rise. And then there's the leadership. Now this one is less prevalent in the games as it is in external media sources. But Amy used to be someone who acted on her own initiative most of the time and would enter a leadership role, but usually just within her specific circle when the circumstances demanded it, such as in Sonic Heroes. Usually, what would happen in these games is Sonic would be the one leading unless he was otherwise not able to, such as when he thought he was going to die in Sonic Adventure 2, or when he was dead in Sonic 06. But outside of that, Sonic found himself in the leadership role, and he did so in a rather natural way. He never sought out to be the leader, he would just take action and people would end up following him most of the time. In some ways, he kind of parallels Amy in that they do act on their own initiative. It's just that Sonic seemed to be more easily approachable and was simply just a natural leader in comparison. These days though, Amy is presented as coming up with the ideas most of the time when the team are working together to come through with something, and Sonic sort of just follows it out. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's a different dynamic and it can change up the way the characters interact with each other, but when you look at it strictly from the games, it is quite different. And in some ways, it kind of is reminiscent of the dynamic Sonic had in SatAM with Sally, where Sally was a resistance leader, and Sonic kind of just did what she said, but sometimes got on her nerves by disobeying orders. It's not the same dynamic, but it is closer to that than what the games traditionally were like. Still, as I said, that aspect of Amy doesn't really shine through in the modern games. In Frontiers, obviously she's trapped in a cyber prison, so she wouldn't be able to do much in terms of leading the team anyway. And unless the DLC changes that, I wouldn't expect to see it, so it's unclear how committed the leadership element of Amy is, and if it was just a thing the comics were doing to help give the cast more dynamics and make it a more interesting read. We'll have to wait and see on that one. So I've listed a bunch of things that have changed, but that doesn't mean it's bad. These could be things you very much enjoy and you think improve the character. A lot of these elements are interesting. Having Amy being more proactive in the narrative and gameplay gives her more to do and also means that her fans can see her do more. But likewise, I think it's perfectly fine if you find it rather jarring how her character has shifted. Why would you say jarring? Well, the key issue I'm sure a lot of people have is that all of these changes haven't been shown having a natural transition. One day it wasn't, and the next day it was. And that's an issue I personally have with some of the changes Amy has gone through over the years, is that we don't see how these changes happened, they just suddenly do. If you're interested in narrative and storytelling, that's a disappointment, and I think it's completely fair that if you feel the character has changed in ways, even if you like the new result, if you feel the transition itself was handled poorly, it's completely fair to criticize that and not be a fan of that change, even if you like the end result. So what is going on with Amy? A lot of change, and it puts a lot of things into question, such as how strong is she compared to Knuckles, how fast is she, and what sort of role is she going to play in the future. Maybe this is a setup to have her strike out on her own for a bit and have a Amy dedicated spin-off perhaps. I know some people would really like that. I'm not really sure. I wouldn't say these are bad changes though. These can lead to a lot of options, so we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But that will bring this video to an end. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say and found the discussion interesting, but this is a discussion, so if you want to weigh in with your own opinion, please let me know in the comments down below. Just remember, there's no need to start picking sides and being tribal, we're investigating a topic here. Still, with that all said and done, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you have a great day, and to see you next time, this is the Mighty Emperor, signing off.